Flight time is approximately 3 hours and 40 minutes. The aircraft is an Airbus A320, registration November 343 November, Whiskey. It is a modern, reliable aircraft in excellent condition. The maintenance logbook is clean, showing no outstanding issues. All systems have been checked and verified functional. Mechanically, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this airplane. What will go wrong tonight has nothing to do with machinery and everything to do with human attention and distraction. 144 passengers board the aircraft through the jet bridge. Business people in suits carrying briefcases, heading home after meetings in California. Families with young children, parents juggling bags and car seats and strollers, college students with backpacks, traveling between schools or heading home for fall break. Elderly couples moving slowly down the aisle, searching for their seats. They settle in, stow bags in overhead bins, fasten seatbelts, adjust air vents. Just another evening flight. Many plan to sleep through the journey, waking up as they descend into Minneapolis. Others pull out books or tablets, preparing to pass the time during the cross-country flight. The crew consists of 2 pilots and 3 flight attendants. Captain Timothy Cheney occupies the left seat. He is 53 years old with over 20,000 hours of total flight time, including 10,000 hours in the Airbus A320. He is a senior captain, highly experienced, with an excellent safety record spanning decades. His training records show consistently high performance. His line checks are always satisfactory. He is exactly the kind of pilot airlines want in command, someone with vast experience who can handle any situation. First Officer Richard Cole sits in the right seat. He is 54 years old with 15,000 hours of total time. Like Captain Cheney, he is vastly experienced and well qualified. Both pilots have been with Northwest Airlines for many years. They are professionals, the kind of experienced crew that passengers and airlines trust implicitly. Between them, they have accumulated 35,000 hours of flight time. That is equivalent to 4 years of continuous flying without landing. They have seen everything, handled countless situations, completed thousands of successful flights. But tonight, both men are tired. Not dangerously fatigued, not impaired to the point where they should not be flying, just tired. The low-grade fatigue that comes from working irregular schedules, from crossing time zones, from nights spent in hotel rooms instead of at home. Captain Cheney has been working a demanding schedule over the past several weeks, multiple trips back and forth across the country, with inadequate rest between duty periods. First Officer Cole has been dealing with personal issues at home that have disrupted his sleep. Neither man is alertly rested, but neither feels so fatigued that they are unable to fly. They are just tired, the kind of tiredness that millions of pilots experience regularly and manage to fly safely despite. The departure proceeds normally. At 7:56 in the evening Pacific time, Flight 188 pushes back from the gate. The ground crew disconnects the pushback tug. Cheney starts both engines. The CFM turbofans spool up smoothly, all indications normal. They complete the after-start checklist, receive taxi clearance from ground control, and begin rolling toward the departure runway. San Diego Tower clears them for takeoff at 8:11. Cheney, serving as pilot flying for this leg, advances the thrust levers to the takeoff detent. The engines roar to full power. The Airbus accelerates down the runway, gaining speed rapidly. At the proper rotation speed, Cheney pulls back gently on the side stick. The nose lifts. The main gear leaves the pavement. Flight 188 is airborne, climbing into the darkening sky, turning eastward toward Minnesota. The departure is flawless. They follow the published procedure exactly, climbing through the complex airspace around San Diego. At 10,000 feet, the sterile cockpit rule technically ends. Below that altitude, conversation is supposed to be limited strictly to matters related to the flight. Above 10,000 feet, some casual conversation is permitted, though pilots are expected to remain focused on their duties. They continue climbing, passing through 20,000 feet, then 30,000. Los Angeles Center clears them to their final cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. The autopilot captures the altitude smoothly. The autothrottle adjusts engine power to maintain cruise speed. The aircraft levels off, stabilizing in smooth air. Everything is working perfectly. The flight proceeds uneventfully for the first 2 hours. They cruise at 37,000 feet, the aircraft flying itself on autopilot, following the programmed route with computer precision. The sky is clear, the ride smooth. The the stars bright above them. Captain Cheney and First Officer Cole complete their required duties, monitor systems, communicate with air traffic control as they are handed off from one sector to the next. Everything is professional, routine, exactly as it should be. In the cabin, passengers settle into the rhythm of a long flight. Some recline their seats and close their eyes, trying to sleep. Others watch movies on personal devices. Children play games. Flight attendants move through the aisles, offering drinks and snacks, collecting trash. It is peaceful, unremarkable, exactly what a domestic evening flight should be. But then, something happens that will set in motion one of the most bizarre incidents in modern commercial aviation, and that something is shockingly mundane. The pilots pull out their personal laptop computers. Now, before I continue, I need to explain the regulatory environment at this time. In 2009, the rules about electronic devices in the cockpit were less clearly defined than they are today. Personal laptops were not explicitly prohibited by federal regulations, though their use during flight operations was certainly discouraged and against company policy. The Federal Aviation Administration had rules about sterile cockpit below 10,000 feet, but the rules for cruise flight were less specific. Airlines had their own policies, but enforcement was inconsistent. Many pilots knew they were not supposed to use personal laptops during flight, but the rules were somewhat ambiguous, and the practice was more common than airlines wanted to admit. Both Captain Cheney and First Officer Cole have been dealing with the complex and frustrating aftermath of Northwest Airlines' merger with Delta Airlines. The merger, announced in 2008 and being implemented throughout 2009, has created enormous confusion and anxiety among pilots at both airlines. Questions about seniority lists, base assignments, schedules, pay scales, and countless other employment issues are affecting thousands of pilots. Many Northwest pilots are frustrated, concerned about how the merger will impact their careers, worried about losing seniority they have spent decades building. Cheney and Cole, like many of their colleagues, have been following merger developments closely. They read union updates religiously. They study seniority integration proposals, trying to understand how different scenarios might play out. They attend union meetings, participate in online forums, discuss the situation endlessly with other pilots. It has become an obsession for many Northwest pilots, this constant analysis of how the merger will affect their personal situations. And on this night, during the quiet cruise phase of the flight with the aircraft flying itself smoothly through calm air, they decide to pull out their laptops and review merger documents. It starts innocently enough. Cole opens his laptop first, pulling up a spreadsheet showing proposed seniority integration scenarios. He shows it to Cheney, pointing at numbers, explaining how different approaches would affect their relative positions on the combined seniority list. Cheney leans over to look at Cole's screen. They begin discussing the implications, pointing at the numbers, debating the fairness of different integration methods. The conversation becomes animated. Both men have strong opinions about how the merger should be handled. Both feel that Northwest pilots are being treated unfairly in the integration process. Then Cheney pulls out his own laptop. Now both pilots have computers open on their laps. Both are looking at merger documents. Both are engaged in a detailed, intense conversation about union politics and career implications. The cockpit has become an office, with two employees focused on their personal employment concerns rather than on flying the aircraft. And here is where the insidious danger emerges. The aircraft is flying perfectly on autopilot. The engines are running smoothly, their steady hum filling the background. All systems show normal indications, green lights across the board. The flight management computer is navigating precisely from waypoint to waypoint. The weather radar shows clear skies ahead. There are no weather concerns, no traffic conflicts requiring attention, no problems demanding immediate action. From a technical standpoint, the pilots are not needed for active flying tasks at this moment. The automation is handling everything beautifully, but they are needed for monitoring. They are needed to maintain situational awareness of where they are and where they are going. They are needed to listen to air traffic control radio calls, to respond to handoffs, to coordinate with controllers. They are needed to track their position and prepare for the eventual descent and approach into Minneapolis. They are needed to monitor fuel consumption and weather updates. They are paid to be pilots, not to work on personal business, even if that business relates to their employment. But Cheney and Cole become so engrossed in their laptop discussion that they lose all awareness of the flight. They stop monitoring the radios. They stop checking their position on the navigation displays. They stop tracking time. They enter a bubble of distraction, where the only thing that exists is the conversation they are having about the merger, the spreadsheets they are analyzing, the scenarios they are debating. At 9:14 in the evening Mountain Time, as they pass over Denver, Denver Center attempts to hand them off to Minneapolis Center. This is a routine procedure, transferring the aircraft from one air traffic control sector to another as it moves across the country. The controller keys his microphone. Northwest 188, contact Minneapolis Center now on frequency 132.45. Neither pilot hears the call. They are too focused on their laptops, too deep in conversation about seniority integration. The radio call, which should have immediately gotten their attention, simply does not register. Their brains have tuned out everything except the laptops and the conversation. The controller waits a reasonable time, perhaps 30 seconds, then tries again. Northwest 188, Denver Center. Contact Minneapolis on 132.45. Still no response. The pilots continue their discussion, oblivious to the radio calls. Now the controller becomes slightly concerned. Missing one radio call can happen. Pilots get momentarily distracted, or there is frequency congestion, or they are in the middle of a checklist. But missing two calls is unusual. The controller tries a third time, speaking more slowly and clearly. Northwest 188, Denver Center. If you read, contact Minneapolis Center on frequency 132.45. Silence. The aircraft continues flying eastward, exactly on course, exactly on altitude, but with no one in the cockpit paying attention to anything except laptop screens and merger documents. The controller alerts his supervisor. They discuss the situation briefly. The supervisor suggests trying the aircraft on the previous frequency, in case they never actually switched to Denver's frequency. The controller tries. Northwest 188, if you are still on this frequency, remain with Denver Center on 132.90. Nothing. No response on either frequency. Now they escalate to the next level of protocol. They try calling on the emergency frequency 121.5, which all aircraft are required to monitor. Northwest 188, Denver Center on guard. How do you read? The word guard is aviation slang for the emergency frequency. Using it gets pilots' attention immediately because it signals something serious. But in the cockpit of Flight 188, neither Cheney nor Cole is listening to any frequency. The radios are functioning perfectly, broadcasting the controller's increasingly urgent calls, but the pilots have mentally tuned out all audio, except their own conversation. Controllers now implement the next step in loss of communication procedures. They contact other aircraft flying in the same general area, asking them to try reaching Flight 188 on the air-to-air frequency that all aircraft monitor. This sometimes works when controller transmissions do not, because aircraft-to-aircraft communications use different radio equipment and frequencies. Several pilots try. Northwest 188. This is United 476. Do you read on 121.5? No response. Northwest 188. This is Southwest 892. How do you copy? Nothing. Northwest 188. American 234 calling. Radio check. Silence. The aircraft continues flying, ghost-like, unresponsive, while multiple controllers and pilots attempt to make contact. On radar screens across multiple air traffic control facilities, supervisors and controllers watch the blip representing Flight 188 move steadily eastward, maintaining perfect altitude and course, showing no signs of emergency or distress, but utterly silent. If you are as disturbed by this as I am, go ahead and hit that like button right now. And make sure you stay subscribed, because what happens next shows how close this situation came to a national security crisis. Share this video because understanding pilot distraction is critical for everyone who flies. They try another communication method. Controllers send data link messages through the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, known by its acronym as ACARS. This is a text-based communication system that allows ground personnel to send messages directly to cockpit displays. It is designed as a backup to voice radio, a way to communicate when radio is unavailable or impractical. The messages are sent. In the cockpit, they arrive successfully, causing a soft chime and creating a visual indication on the screen that new messages are waiting to be read. But both pilots are so intensely focused on their laptops and their merger discussion that they do not notice the chime or the message indicator. The warnings go unacknowledged. Controllers send multiple data link messages over the next 20 minutes. Each one arrives successfully. Each one is ignored. The pilots continue their discussion, completely unaware that the entire air traffic control system is trying desperately to contact them. As the minutes tick by with no communication, the situation escalates dramatically. This is 2009, just 8 years after September 11, 2001. The terrorist attacks that day, when hijackers took control of 4 commercial airliners and crashed them into buildings and fields, fundamentally changed how aviation authorities respond to unresponsive aircraft. An airliner that does not respond to radio calls is no longer just an operational problem. It is treated as a potential national security threat. Controllers notify their supervisors. Supervisors notify facility managers. Facility managers notify the Federal Aviation Administration Command Center. The Command Center notifies the North American Aerospace Defense Command, known as NORAD, the military organization responsible for aerospace warning and control for North America. At NORAD headquarters, duty officers receive the notification with immediate alarm. An Airbus A320 with 147 people aboard has lost all radio contact and is not responding to any attempts at communication. The aircraft is flying across the American heartland, heading toward major population centers. Is this another hijacking? Have the pilots been incapacitated? Is this aircraft being flown toward a target? NORAD places fighter jets on immediate alert. At Truax Field Air National Guard Base in Madison, Wisconsin, 2 F-16 Fighting Falcon pilots are scrambled. They run to their aircraft. Ground crews have already prepared the jets, engines running, weapons armed. Within minutes, both fighters are airborne, climbing rapidly toward Flight 188's altitude, prepared to intercept and determine what is happening aboard the airliner. Northwest Airlines Operations Center in Minneapolis is also contacted. Duty managers receive the notification with shock and confusion. One of their aircraft has lost all communication and is not responding to anyone. They immediately attempt to contact the flight through every available means. More data link messages. Attempts through satellite communication systems. Messages sent via high-frequency radio. Nothing works. The aircraft remains completely silent. Operations managers pull up Flight 188's information. They see that Captain Cheney and First Officer Cole are both highly experienced, respected pilots with excellent records. There is no reason to suspect any problems with the crew. The aircraft maintenance history is reviewed. The plane is in excellent condition, no outstanding issues. What could possibly be wrong? Senior management is notified. The possibility of hijacking is discussed. Should they notify the FBI? Should they warn airports along the aircraft's route? What if this is another terrorist attack? The memories of September 11th are still fresh, still painful. Nobody wants to overreact, but nobody wants to underreact either. At 10:13, Flight 188 reaches its top of descent point, the location programmed into the flight management computer where the aircraft should begin descending for arrival into Minneapolis. This is a critical waypoint, the transition from cruise flight to the arrival and approach phase. Under normal circumstances, pilots begin preparing well before this point, reviewing approach charts, listening to airport weather broadcasts, coordinating with air traffic control for descent clearance. But in the cockpit of Flight 188, the top of descent waypoint passes completely unnoticed. The flight management computer, programmed to maintain altitude unless commanded otherwise, simply continues flying at 37,000 feet. The aircraft passes over the waypoint and continues eastward, missing the descent entirely. Minneapolis Approach Control has been briefed on the situation. They know Flight 188 is not responding to radio calls. They are prepared to handle the aircraft when it arrives, to clear other traffic and provide priority handling. But as they watch their radar screens, they see something alarming. The aircraft is not descending. It is maintaining cruise altitude when it should be coming down. Controllers try calling. Northwest 188, Minneapolis approach. Begin descent to flight level 240. No response. They try repeatedly over the next several minutes, watching in growing alarm as the aircraft maintains altitude and continues flying east. At 10:27, Flight 188 passes directly over Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, the airport where it is supposed to land. The airport where 144 passengers expect to deplane. The aircraft flies over at 37,000 feet, showing no sign of descending. No indication that the pilots are aware they have reached their destination. Controllers watch helplessly as the radar blip moves past Minneapolis and continues eastward over Wisconsin, heading toward Lake Michigan and beyond. The aircraft has now overflown its destination. It is heading away from where it is supposed to be, toward empty airspace over the Great Lakes. If it continues on this heading, it will eventually fly out over Lake Michigan, possibly continuing into Canada or beyond. The situation has now reached maximum urgency. Fighter jets are vectored to intercept. NORAD commanders discuss options. If this aircraft poses a threat to populated areas, if it appears to be heading toward a target, they have authorization to take action. That action, in the worst case, could mean shooting down the airliner. It is an unthinkable option, but post-September 11th protocols make it clear that allowing another hijacked aircraft to be used as a weapon is not acceptable. The F-16 fighters are approaching Flight 188's position, climbing through 30,000 feet. The lead pilot is receiving constant updates from ground controllers. He is authorized to make visual contact, to attempt to see into the cockpit windows, to determine if the pilots are visible and responsive. But before the fighters can reach the airliner, something finally breaks through the wall of distraction surrounding Captain Cheney and First Officer Cole. And that something is not a radio call, not a data link message, not the arrival of fighter jets. It is something much more mundane. A flight attendant picks up the interphone handset in the rear galley and calls the cockpit. The passengers are becoming restless, she explains. They are asking about arrival time. When will they be landing in Minneapolis? Should she make an announcement? The interphone call rings in the cockpit. Unlike the radio calls, which both pilots have mentally tuned out, the interphone has a different tone, a sound that penetrates their distraction. Cheney reaches for the handset without really thinking about it, answering automatically. Cockpit. Captain, the passengers are asking about our arrival time, the flight attendant says. When should I tell them we will be landing? The question is simple, routine, the kind of thing flight attendants ask on every flight, but it has a dramatic effect on Captain Cheney. He glances at the clock on the instrument panel, then at the navigation display showing their position. His eyes widen with shock. His face goes pale. His hand tightens on the interphone handset. They are over Eau Claire, Wisconsin, more than 150 miles east of Minneapolis. They have overflown their destination by 77 minutes of flying time. They have been so engrossed in their laptops, so completely distracted by their merger discussion, that they have lost all situational awareness and flown past Minneapolis without even noticing. "Oh my God," Cheney says, his voice captured on the cockpit voice recorder. The tone is one of absolute horror, the realization of catastrophic error crashing down on him. Cole looks up from his laptop, confused by the captain's reaction. Then he sees the navigation display. His expression mirrors Cheney's shock and dismay. They have blown through their destination. They are over 100 miles past where they should be. They have been completely unresponsive to air traffic control for over an hour. Both pilots immediately snap back to full professional mode. Laptops are closed and shoved aside. Cheney keys the radio microphone, his voice urgent. Minneapolis Center, Northwest 188. The response is instant, the controller's voice tight with controlled urgency. After more than an hour of attempting to contact this flight, after involving NORAD and scrambling fighters, the controller is both relieved and alarmed to finally hear from them. Northwest 188, Minneapolis Center. Verify you are responding. State your position and intentions. Serge Cheney knows he needs to explain what happened, but how do you explain this? How do you tell a controller that you were so distracted by personal laptops that you flew an hour past your destination? He takes a breath. Minneapolis 188. We got distracted up here and overflew Minneapolis. Request vectors back for the approach. There is a brief pause on the radio. The controller is probably trying to process what he just heard. Distracted. They got distracted and flew 150 miles past their destination while the entire air traffic control system was trying to contact them and military fighters were being scrambled. Northwest 188, roger your position. Confirm the flight deck is secure and you have control of the aircraft. This is a critical question. The controller needs to verify that this is actually the legitimate crew responding, not a hijacker, and that they have full control. Affirmative, Minneapolis. Flight deck is secure, both pilots present, and we have full control of the aircraft. Northwest 188. Are you declaring an emergency? Cheney hesitates. Declaring an emergency is the right thing to do. This is clearly an emergency situation. But declaring an emergency means immediate investigation, possible certificate action, almost certainly the end of both their careers. He knows he should declare, but the words stick in his throat. Negative. Not declaring emergency at this time. We are ready to return to Minneapolis. The controller follows his protocols. Northwest 188, Roger. I am going to need you to remain this frequency. Stand by for vectors back to Minneapolis. He immediately alerts his supervisor and NORAD that contact has been established and the crew reports the aircraft is secure. The fighters that were closing in on Flight 188 are ordered to stand down from intercept, but continue monitoring. NORAD remains on alert, not fully trusting the situation until the aircraft is safely on the ground. The controller begins vectoring Flight 188 back toward Minneapolis. Northwest 188, turn right heading 270, descend and maintain flight level 280. Right to 270, descend and maintain flight level 280, Northwest 188. Cheney's voice is professional now, but you can hear the strain, the stress, the knowledge of what he has done. They turn the aircraft around, beginning the descent back toward Minneapolis. The flight back takes approximately 25 minutes. During this time, both pilots are fully engaged, completely focused, acutely aware of the enormous error they have made and the consequences that are coming. In the cabin, passengers notice the unusual maneuvering, the extended flight time, the turn back toward the west. Some ask flight attendants what is happening. The flight attendants, who have been told only that there was a minor navigation issue, provide vague reassurances. Most passengers remain unaware of the full extent of what has occurred. At 10:56 in the evening, more than 1 hour after they should have landed, Flight 188 finally touches down on runway 30 right at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. The landing is smooth, professional, exactly what you would expect from pilots with their experience. Cheney taxis to the gate following ground control instructions. When he parks the aircraft and shuts down the engines, both pilots sit for a moment in silence, the weight of what just happened settling over them. As passengers deplane, confused about the delay, but relieved to be on the ground, and unaware of the drama that unfolded, Captain Cheney and First Officer Cole know their careers are over. Within minutes of parking at the gate, they are met by airline management, Federal Aviation Administration inspectors, airport security, and Transportation Security Administration agents. They are escorted to separate rooms for questioning. Their pilot certificates are confiscated pending investigation. They are removed from flight status immediately. This incident exposed a massive vulnerability in aviation safety. If this story showed you something you did not know about cockpit distractions, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more real aviation investigations. Give this video a like to help spread awareness about attention management and distraction, and share it with anyone interested in aviation, because understanding how experienced pilots can completely lose situational awareness is critical for improving safety. Your engagement helps me continue bringing you these important stories from the cockpit. The investigation that follows is swift, comprehensive, and unforgiving. The Federal Aviation Administration, the National Transportation Safety Board, and Northwest Airlines all conduct thorough inquiries. The cockpit voice recorder is downloaded and analyzed. Every word, every sound from the cockpit is examined. The flight data recorder is studied in detail, showing exactly what the aircraft was doing during the period of radio silence. The cockpit voice recorder tells the story with devastating clarity. For over 1 hour, there is virtually no sound of the pilots communicating with air traffic control. There are no standard radio calls, no position reports, no acknowledgements of controller transmissions. Instead, there is continuous conversation between Cheney and Cole about the merger, about seniority lists, about base assignments, about union politics. There are sounds clearly identifiable as laptop keyboards being typed on. There is the rustling of papers, the clicking of computer mice. There is animated discussion, even occasional laughter, as they debate merger scenarios. There is absolutely no indication that either pilot was monitoring the aircraft's position, listening to radio calls, tracking their progress toward Minneapolis, or performing any of the duties expected of pilots in command of an aircraft. They were completely disengaged from the act of flying, treating the cockpit as an office where they could work on personal business while the autopilot flew the plane. Both pilots are interviewed extensively, separately and together. Initially, they attempt to minimize what happened. They claim they were discussing important company business that required their attention. They suggest that the airline's handling of the merger created stress and distractions that contributed to the incident. They try to frame their actions as understandable given the circumstances, but under detailed questioning, their defenses crumble. They are forced to admit they were using personal laptops to review merger documents that had nothing to do with the current flight. They admit they became so engrossed in this activity that they completely lost situational awareness. They acknowledge they violated company policy, prohibiting personal electronic device use during flight operations. They confess they were not monitoring radios, not tracking position, not preparing for arrival. The FAA's investigation concludes that both pilots violated numerous federal aviation regulations. They failed to maintain continuous radio watch as required. They were not monitoring their position and progress as required. They were not prepared for descent and approach at the appropriate time. They used personal electronic devices during flight operations in violation of company policy. They failed to maintain proper lookout and attention to their duties as pilot in command and second in command. The violations are so clear, so egregious, that the FAA has no choice but to take the strongest action available. Within 2 weeks of the incident, the FAA revokes both pilots' airline transport pilot certificates. This is the regulatory death penalty for a pilot, the most severe action the agency can take. It effectively ends their careers in commercial aviation. While it is theoretically possible to reapply for certificates after a period of time, the circumstances of this case make it virtually certain that neither man will ever fly commercially again. Northwest Airlines, which by this time is fully merged with Delta Airlines, terminates both pilots immediately for cause. Their union attempts to defend them, filing grievances, arguing that the punishment is too severe, but the airline's position is firm. What Cheney and Cole did was so far outside acceptable behavior, created such a massive safety risk, and generated such negative publicity for the airline that termination is the only appropriate response. The incident becomes national news. Major newspapers run stories. Television news programs cover it extensively. Late-night talk show comedians make jokes about pilots so focused on laptops that they fly past their destination. Saturday Night Live creates a sketch parodying the incident. The story spreads internationally, becoming an example of American aviation incompetence and distraction culture. Passengers who were aboard Flight 188 that night learn from news reports what actually happened. Many express outrage and fear. They had trusted these pilots with their lives, and those pilots had been working on personal laptops instead of flying the airplane. Some passengers sue the airline. Others vow never to fly Northwest or Delta again. The incident damages public confidence in airline safety. For the aviation industry, this incident exposes a gap in regulations and training that had not been adequately addressed. The sterile cockpit rule, which prohibits non-essential activities below 10,000 feet during critical phases of flight, is well established and generally followed, but the rules for cruise flight above 10,000 feet are less specific. Personal electronic devices were not explicitly banned at cruise altitude in federal regulations at that time, though most airlines had policies against their use. In the aftermath, the FAA moves quickly to close this regulatory gap. New rules are implemented explicitly prohibiting the use of personal electronic devices during all phases of flight operations at any altitude. Laptops, tablets, personal phones, any personal electronics are now banned in the cockpit whenever pilots are on duty. The rules are made crystal clear, removing any ambiguity. Airlines enhance their policies and training. They make explicit in ground school and recurrent training that personal electronics are absolutely prohibited. They emphasize the dangers of distraction and the importance of maintaining situational awareness even during routine cruise operations when the autopilot is handling most tasks. Some airlines implement enhanced monitoring of crew activities. Random cockpit checks become more common. Some carriers install security cameras that can be monitored by ground supervisors. Others use flight data analysis to identify patterns suggesting lack of attention to duties, such as missed radio calls or late descents. The incident also leads to broader discussions about pilot fatigue and scheduling. While Cheney and Cole were not so fatigued that they fell asleep, Their tiredness contributed to their susceptibility to distraction. Airlines begin paying more attention to cumulative fatigue, to ensuring pilots have adequate rest between duty periods, to recognizing that legal rest periods do not always translate to actual sleep. For me, as a pilot reviewing this case years later, what strikes me most is how easily it could have ended in disaster. Cheney and Cole were extraordinarily lucky. They were out of radio contact for 77 minutes, flew 150 miles past their destination, and yet nothing bad happened. No traffic conflicts developed that required their attention, no mechanical problems emerged, no weather materialized that they needed to avoid. The aircraft simply flew itself perfectly while they worked on laptops, but it could have been so different. If another aircraft had been on a collision course, if the traffic collision avoidance system had issued a resolution advisory requiring immediate maneuvering, they might not have responded in time. If an engine had developed problems, if hydraulic systems had begun failing, if any of 1,000 potential issues had emerged, they would not have been monitoring the indications and might not have caught it until too late. The fuel they carried was calculated precisely for the flight to Minneapolis, with required reserves. By flying 150 miles past the destination and then returning, they burned significantly more fuel than planned. If winds had been less favorable, if the return flight had taken longer, they could have faced a fuel emergency. They came closer to that situation than most people realize. And if military fighters had intercepted them before radio contact was restored, if those fighters had perceived the unresponsive airliner as a potential threat to population centers, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Post-September 11th protocols authorize military aircraft to use force, including shooting down airliners, if they pose a clear threat. It is an unthinkable option, but it exists. Cheney and Cole came frighteningly close to putting themselves and their passengers in that situation. The 144 passengers aboard Flight 188 that night were incredibly fortunate. They landed safely, arrived at their destination, only slightly delayed, and most never knew how close they came to potential disaster. But they should never have been put in that situation. They trusted two 1830 experienced professional pilots to fly them safely across the country. Those pilots violated that trust in the most fundamental way by choosing to prioritize personal business over their professional duty. Captain Timothy Cheney and First Officer Richard Cole lost their careers, their certificates, their livelihoods. Their names became synonymous with pilot distraction and loss of situational awareness, but they are alive. The passengers survived. The aircraft landed safely. In that sense, they were very, very fortunate. They paid a high price for their distraction, but not the ultimate price that their negligence could have demanded. I am Captain Paul Henderson. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Remember that flying an aircraft requires constant attention and situational awareness, even during the quiet cruise phase when everything seems routine and the autopilot is handling the flying. The autopilot can control the aircraft, but it cannot maintain awareness. It cannot monitor radios. It cannot make decisions. It cannot recognize when something is wrong. Those responsibilities belong to the pilots, and they cannot be delegated to a computer or postponed while we attend to personal matters. Fly safe, eliminate distractions from the cockpit, and never forget that from the moment you push back from the gate until you park at your destination, you are responsible for every soul aboard your aircraft. That responsibility demands your complete and undivided attention. Until next time, this is Captain Paul Henderson signing off.